Jasmine Washington stood frozen in the luxurious corporate office, staring at Malcolm Reynolds as he slid termination papers across his mahogany desk. After 15 years of loyal service, her career was over in an instant. "You discriminated against the wrong passenger's children today," the airline's CEO stated coldly. "Those triplets? They're my sons." Before we dive into this shocking story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to see more stories of justice being served. Now, let's find out how these triplets ended up changing an entire airline. Isaiah, Elijah, and Caleb Johnson were not your average 16-year-old triplets. All three maintained perfect GPAs at their prestigious high school in Atlanta, each specializing in different academic fields, Isaiah in mathematics, Elijah in computer science, and Caleb in biochemistry. Today marked a significant milestone, their first time traveling alone to the National Academic Decathlon in San Francisco. What most people didn't know, including airline employees, was that their adoptive father, Robert Johnson, was secretly the CEO of Glowstar Holdings, the parent company that owned Skyline Airlines. After losing his wife Angela to breast cancer when the boys were just 7, Robert had raised them as a single father, instilling values of dignity, excellence, and perseverance. "Remember, stay together at all times," Robert instructed as he dropped them off at the airport curb. His dark SUV with tinted windows allowed him to maintain his privacy. "You have your boarding passes, IDs, and emergency contacts?" "Yes, Dad," for the 10th time, Isaiah, the most outspoken of the three, replied with a good-natured eye roll. "We've been preparing for this trip for months," Elijah added, adjusting his glasses. The most technical-minded brother had researched everything from airport layouts to optimal boarding procedures. Caleb, the quietest and most sensitive of the triplets, gave his father a tight hug. "We'll make you proud, Dad." Robert watched his sons enter the terminal with a mixture of pride and anxiety. It wasn't just parental concern, he knew firsthand the challenges young black men faced in spaces where they were often unfairly judged. As CEO, he deliberately kept his identity hidden from frontline employees, believing that genuine service quality could only be assessed when staff didn't know who they were serving. "They'll be fine," he reassured himself, picking up his phone to call his executive assistant. "Janet, I'll be monitoring Skyline Flight 372 today. Make sure our security team has access to all cabin feeds." Inside the terminal, the triplets navigated the initial check-in process smoothly. Dressed in matching blazers with their school emblem, they carried themselves with the quiet confidence their father had nurtured in them. They were excited but nervous, repeatedly checking their documents and following Elijah's meticulously planned schedule. "First-class lounge is this way," Elijah pointed, consulting the airport map on his phone. "Dad said we should get there early to avoid rushing." Robert Johnson could afford to give his sons every advantage, but he was careful to raise them with humility and awareness. They knew the privilege they had was rare, especially for young black men in America, and they never took it for granted. "I still feel weird about flying first class when Dad isn't with us," Caleb admitted as they approached the exclusive lounge. "He said it's safer," Isaiah reminded him. "More space, less crowding, better service if anything happens with your asthma." What they didn't know was that their journey was about to become much more challenging than any of them had anticipated. The triplets approached the first-class check-in counter, where passengers were being processed efficiently by various gate agents. When their turn came, they were directed to Counter 5, staffed by Jasmine Washington, a flight attendant who had been with Skyline Airlines for 15 years. Jasmine looked up from her computer screen, her pleasant smile faltering slightly as she saw 3 young black teenagers standing before her. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone notably cooler than it had been with the previous passengers. "Yes, ma'am," Isaiah replied politely, placing their tickets and identification on the counter. "We're checking in for Flight 372 to San Francisco." Jasmine picked up their documents, examining them with unusual scrutiny. "First class? All 3 of you?" The skepticism in her voice was unmistakable. Yes, ma'am, Elijah confirmed. Our father purchased the tickets. And where is your father? Jasmine asked, looking past them as if expecting to find an adult. He's not traveling with us, Caleb explained quietly. We're going to an academic competition. Jasmine's eyebrows rose. I see. Well, I'll need to verify these tickets. They seem unusual. She picked up her phone and made a call, turning slightly away from the triplets but not far enough that they couldn't hear her words. Karen. I have 3 young men here with first-class tickets that seem suspicious. Can you run a verification? Johnson, Isaiah, Elijah, and Caleb. She emphasized young men in a way that made her meaning clear to anyone listening. The triplets exchanged glances. They had experienced subtle racism before, their father had prepared them for it, but this felt different, more overt. Is there a problem with our tickets? Isaiah asked, maintaining his composure. Just following protocol, Jasmine replied curtly, not making eye contact. Meanwhile, at counters 1 and 3, 2 groups of white teenagers, similarly dressed for what appeared to be a school trip, were checked in promptly without any verification calls or additional questions. Elijah discreetly took out his phone and texted their father, experiencing some issues at check-in. Agent questioning our tickets. Nothing we can't handle. What the triplets didn't know was that Robert Johnson was already watching the situation unfold. In his home office, he had multiple screens displaying security feeds from throughout the airport, one specifically focused on the first-class check-in area. His face darkened as he recognized Jasmine Washington, a longtime employee whose file contained several complaints from minority passengers, complaints that had apparently been deemed unsubstantiated by middle management. Sir, his security chief said, entering the office, should we intervene? Robert shook his head. Not yet. Let's see how this plays out. But start pulling Ms. Washington's complete employment history. Every complaint, every review, everything. Back at the airport, after a tense 5-minute wait, Jasmine finally returned their documents. Your tickets have been verified, she said, without apologizing for the delay. Boarding will begin in 45 minutes. Please be ready when first class is called. The triplets thanked her politely and moved toward the lounge, feeling the weight of her stare on their backs. That was weird, right? Caleb whispered once they were out of earshot. Definitely, Isaiah agreed. But Dad always says not to let these things throw us off our game. We're here to win a competition, remember? When the pre-boarding announcement was made for passengers needing assistance and families with small children, the triplets remained seated, waiting for the first-class boarding call. When it came, they gathered their belongings and approached the gate, where Jasmine was now checking boarding passes. Her smile returned for the elderly white couple ahead of them, but froze again when the triplets presented their boarding passes. I'm sorry, but first-class boarding is only for first-class passengers, she said loudly enough for others to hear. We are first-class passengers, Elijah stated calmly, pointing to their boarding passes. Jasmine made a show of examining their passes again. These appear to be first-class, but I'll need to verify again. Please step aside while I check with my supervisor. The growing line behind them began to shift impatiently. The triplets, mindful of causing a scene, moved to the side as instructed. This is ridiculous, a white businessman in line commented. I've been on this flight every week for a year, and I've never seen anyone's boarding pass verified twice. The tension was mounting, and for the first time, the triplets began to worry about whether they would make their flight at all. This is completely unacceptable, a middle-aged white woman in a business suit interrupted, stepping out of the boarding line. I've been watching this entire situation unfold, and it's obvious what's happening here. The woman, who later introduced herself as Patricia Doherty, a corporate attorney, approached Jasmine. I'd like to speak to your supervisor immediately. These young men have valid first-class tickets that you've already verified once. This is textbook discrimination. Jasmine's demeanor changed instantly. There's no need for that, ma'am. I was just following protocol. A protocol that apparently only applies to certain passengers, Patricia replied pointedly. With other passengers now watching intently, Jasmine reluctantly allowed the triplets to board, though not without a final comment: keep your boarding passes handy. The flight crew may need to verify them again. Once on the plane, the triplets settled into their spacious first-class seats, trying to regain their excitement about the trip despite the unsettling experience at the gate. That lawyer lady was awesome, Isaiah whispered, carefully keeping his voice down. I'm just glad we're on board, Caleb replied, arranging his asthma inhaler and emergency medication in the seat pocket in front of him. His anxiety often triggered mild asthma symptoms, and the stressful check-in hadn't helped. Their relief was short-lived. As the cabin crew prepared for departure, Jasmine Washington appeared in the first-class cabin, now wearing her flight attendant uniform. The triplets exchanged concerned glances as they realized she would be serving their section. Throughout the boarding process, Jasmine made a point of warmly welcoming every first-class passenger except the triplets. When she distributed pre-flight beverages, she skipped their row entirely. When Elijah politely raised his hand to request water, she pretended not to see him. Excuse me, Isaiah finally called out as she passed their row for the third time. Could we please have some water? Jasmine turned with a tight smile. I'll get to you when I can. I'm attending to priority passengers first. An elderly white man across the aisle frowned. Aren't all first-class passengers priority? Jasmine ignored the comment and continued down the aisle. The man, introducing himself as Dr. William Foster, leaned across to the triplets. Is there a problem here? She's been ignoring you since boarding. It started at check-in, Elijah explained quietly. She questioned our tickets twice. Dr. Foster's frown deepened. That's unacceptable. I'm a platinum member with this airline, and I've never seen such behavior. Elijah, always the most tech-savvy, had begun discreetly recording Jasmine's interactions on his phone, carefully documenting the discrepancy in service. As the flight progressed, Jasmine's behavior became increasingly blatant. When meal service began, she served all other first-class passengers before reluctantly approaching the triplets. We only have the chicken option left, she informed them curtly, despite the fact that several passengers after them received the beef option they requested. Caleb, who had been getting progressively more anxious, began to wheeze slightly. The combination of stress, recycled air, and the slight drop in cabin pressure was affecting his asthma. Ma'am, Isaiah called to Jasmine, genuine concern in his voice. My brother needs some water for his medication. He has asthma. Please return to your seat and stop causing a disturbance, Jasmine responded loudly. If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have security meet us upon landing. Several passengers looked up in surprise at her harsh tone. The triplets had been nothing but polite throughout the flight. But he needs his medication, Isaiah persisted, growing worried about Caleb's increasing difficulty breathing. I said sit down. Jasmine snapped. I don't care who you think you are or what special treatment you're used to getting. On this aircraft, you follow my instructions. The cabin grew quiet as passengers witnessed the exchange. A second flight attendant, Amelia Foster, who had been working in the economy section, appeared in the galley, alerted by the unusual tension in first class. Is everything okay here? She asked, looking between Jasmine and the triplets. Before Jasmine could respond, Dr. Foster intervened. No, everything is not okay. This young man needs medical attention, and your colleague has been providing discriminatory service since takeoff. I've been flying with Skyline for 20 years and have never witnessed such unprofessional behavior. Amelia looked alarmed and immediately approached Caleb, who was now visibly struggling. What do you need, sweetheart? His inhaler is in the overhead bin, Elijah explained. And he needs water to take it with his backup medication. While Jasmine stood by, arms crossed, Amelia quickly retrieved Caleb's bag and brought him water. Other passengers had begun recording the situation on their phones, some already uploading the videos to social media using the plane's Wi-Fi. In his home office, Robert Johnson watched the footage streaming in from multiple angles, his face a mask of controlled fury. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Janet, have security and medical personnel meet Flight 372 at the gate in San Francisco. And contact Thomas Baldwin. Tell him we have a situation that requires his immediate attention. Back on the plane, Amelia was doing her best to help Caleb while Jasmine berated her for overstepping. You're not assigned to first class, Jasmine hissed. Return to your section immediately. A passenger needs medical assistance, Amelia replied firmly. That takes priority over section assignments. These boys have been disruptive the entire flight, Jasmine insisted, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. They shouldn't even be in first class. You know the type, they probably used stolen credit cards for those tickets. Gasps echoed through the cabin at the openly racist remark. Unbeknownst to Jasmine, at least 5 passengers were recording the exchange, and 2 had already sent videos to contacts at local news stations. A woman seated 2 rows ahead stood up. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, a pulmonologist. Let me help. She moved quickly to Caleb's side, introduced herself to the boys, and began assisting him with his medication and breathing techniques. This is completely unacceptable, Dr. Chen stated firmly after Caleb's breathing had stabilized. I'll be filing a formal complaint about this incident. Discriminatory treatment that interferes with medical care crosses every professional line. Jasmine's face flushed with anger. I'll have all of you reported for interfering with a flight crew member. That's a federal offense. What she didn't realize was that her career at Skyline Airlines, and possibly in the aviation industry altogether, was already over. Caleb's breathing had stabilized thanks to Dr. Chen's assistance, but the tension in the first-class cabin continued to escalate. Passengers were whispering among themselves, many still recording discreetly on their phones. The video of Jasmine's racist comment about stolen credit cards had already been viewed thousands of times online, with the hashtag #SkylineRacism beginning to trend. How are you feeling now? Dr. Chen asked Caleb quietly, monitoring his breathing. Better, thank you, he replied, though his voice was still strained. The medication was working, but the stress of the situation wasn't helping his condition. Isaiah kept a protective arm around his brother's shoulder while Elijah continued documenting everything on his phone. They had been raised to handle difficult situations with dignity, but this was testing their resolve. Midway through the flight, Caleb's asthma symptoms returned with greater intensity. The recycled cabin air combined with the altitude was aggravating his condition. I need my emergency inhaler, he wheezed to his brothers. It's in my backpack in the overhead compartment. Isaiah immediately pressed the call button, which Jasmine deliberately ignored while attending to a minor drink request from a white passenger 3 rows ahead. After pressing the button twice more with no response, Isaiah stood up. Excuse me, he called politely but firmly to Jasmine. My brother urgently needs his medication from the overhead bin. Jasmine turned to him with a cold stare. Return to your seat immediately. I'll get to you when I'm available. But this is an emergency, Isaiah insisted, his usual composure beginning to crack under the stress of watching his brother struggle to breathe. Sit down now, or I'll have you restrained for the remainder of the flight, Jasmine threatened, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. Dr. Chen stood up again. This young man needs his medication immediately. As a physician, I'm telling you this is medically necessary. I don't care if you're the Surgeon General, Jasmine snapped. On this aircraft, I have the final authority. It was at this moment that Amelia Foster, who had been watching the situation deteriorate from the galley, made a decision that would later be described as both career-risking and life-saving. She stepped forward, gently moved past Jasmine, and retrieved Caleb's backpack from the overhead bin. Here you go, sweetie, she said, handing it to Caleb while Isaiah helped him find the inhaler. Jasmine's face contorted with rage. What do you think you're doing? You are directly violating my authority as lead flight attendant. I'm providing necessary medical assistance to a passenger in distress, Amelia replied calmly. It's not only within airline policy but required by federal aviation regulations. These boys have been nothing but trouble since they boarded, Jasmine said, her voice rising. They don't belong in first class. They don't know how to behave properly. You know how they are. The cabin fell silent at the unmistakably racist implication. Even passengers who had been trying to mind their own business were now fully engaged in the unfolding drama. How exactly are they? Challenged Dr. Chen, stepping into the aisle. 3 polite teenagers who have done nothing wrong except exist in a space you've decided they don't belong in. I've been watching this entire flight, and the only person behaving inappropriately is you. Jasmine turned on Dr. Chen. Stay out of this unless you want to be added to the report I'm filing. I'll have all of you banned from Skyline for interfering with crew member duties. At this point, a third individual joined the confrontation, a tall, distinguished man in his 60s who had been quietly observing from the front row of first class. Young lady, he said, his deep voice commanding attention, I'm Judge William Harrington of the Federal Court of Appeals. What I'm witnessing here appears to be a textbook case of discrimination and medical negligence. I strongly advise you to provide these young men with appropriate service immediately, or I'll personally ensure this incident receives the full attention of both the FAA and the Justice Department. What would you do if you were in the triplets' position? Comment 1. If you would stay calm and document everything like Elijah, or 2. If you would stand up and demand proper treatment like Isaiah did. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of justice being served. How do you think the airline will respond when they land? Let's find out what happens next. As Flight 372 began its descent into San Francisco International Airport, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin remained charged with tension. Jasmine had retreated to the galley, communicating with the cockpit via the internal phone system. The triplets, now under the protective watch of Amelia, Dr. Chen, and several other passengers, were recovering from the ordeal. Caleb's breathing had stabilized, but the emotional impact of the discrimination they'd faced was evident on all 3 boys' faces. The captain has asked all passengers to prepare for landing and ensure all electronic devices are in airplane mode, Jasmine announced over the intercom, pointedly avoiding eye contact with the triplets or anyone who had defended them. What none of the passengers knew was that Skyline's management had already been alerted to the situation. Videos of Jasmine's behavior had gone viral while the plane was still in the air, and the airline's social media team was in crisis mode. More significantly, Robert Johnson had made several calls from his car as he drove toward the airport to meet his sons. We're approaching the gate, Elijah observed, looking out the window. And there are a lot more ground crew than usual. He was right. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, an unusual scene unfolded. Instead of the typical 1 or 2 gate agents, there was a small crowd waiting, airline staff in management uniforms, airport security, paramedics, and several individuals in suits. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at San Francisco International Airport, the captain announced. We ask that all passengers remain seated until further instructions. We have a special situation that requires attention from our ground team. Murmurs spread through the cabin as passengers speculated about what was happening. Jasmine, who had been preparing for landing in the galley, visibly paled when she looked out the window and saw the gathering. When the aircraft door finally opened, the first person to board was a tall, authoritative woman in an impeccable suit with a Skyline executive badge. Ms. Washington, she said, her voice carrying through the quiet cabin. I'm Vanessa Thompson, Regional Director of Operations for Skyline Airlines. I need you to come with me immediately. The shock on Jasmine's face was evident. What's going on? I was about to file a report about disruptive passengers. That won't be necessary, Ms. Thompson interrupted firmly. We've received multiple reports about this flight, including video evidence that has been shared with our executive team. Security will escort you to the administrative offices. 2 airport security officers appeared behind Ms. Thompson, waiting to escort Jasmine off the aircraft. But these boys, Jasmine began, pointing at the triplets. These young men, Ms. Thompson corrected sharply, will be handled with the respect and care that all Skyline passengers deserve. Now, please come with me." As Jasmine was escorted off the plane, Ms. Thompson turned to address the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Skyline Airlines, I want to sincerely apologize for any distress caused during this flight. We are taking this situation very seriously. Representatives will be available at the gate to take statements from anyone who witnessed today's events. We appreciate your patience." She then approached the triplets directly. Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Johnson, I understand you've had a very difficult experience. Medical personnel are waiting to check on your condition, and we have arranged a private lounge for you to rest and recover before continuing to your destination." The triplets exchanged surprised glances. This level of attention from an airline executive was unexpected. "Thank you, ma'am," Isaiah responded politely. "But we have a competition to get to." "We're aware of your academic decathlon," Ms. Thompson assured them. "Transportation is being arranged to take you directly to your hotel. Your father has been informed of the situation." As the other passengers disembarked, many stopped to express their support to the triplets. Dr. Chen provided her contact information, offering to serve as a witness if needed. Judge Harrington handed each boy his card, commending them for their composure under pressure. Amelia Foster, who had risked her position to help Caleb, approached them last. "I'm so sorry this happened on our airline," she said sincerely. "You handled yourselves with such dignity. Your parents must be very proud." "Thank you for helping my brother," Elijah said. "We won't forget it." Once off the plane, the triplets were escorted to a private lounge where paramedics checked Caleb's vital signs and confirmed he was stable. As they were discussing their next steps, the lounge door opened, and Robert Johnson walked in, his face a mixture of concern and controlled anger. "Dad!" Caleb exclaimed, rushing to embrace his father. Isaiah and Elijah quickly joined them. "Are you boys all right?" Robert asked, examining each of them carefully. "Caleb, how's your breathing?" "I'm okay now," Caleb assured him. "It was scary for a while, but the second flight attendant and a doctor helped me." Robert nodded, making a mental note to ensure both Amelia and Dr. Chen received proper recognition for their actions. "I saw some of what happened through the security feeds, but I want to hear everything from your perspective." As the triplets recounted their experience, Robert's expression grew increasingly grave. He had witnessed discrimination throughout his life and had tried to prepare his sons for it, but nothing could truly prepare them for being targeted so overtly. "You handled yourselves exactly as I would have hoped," he told them when they finished their account. "With dignity, restraint, and intelligence. I'm incredibly proud of you." What the triplets still didn't know was that their father wasn't just there as a concerned parent. Robert Johnson had arrived in his full capacity as CEO of Glowstar Holdings, and he had already set in motion a chain of events that would transform Skyline Airlines from the inside out. "Get some rest, boys," he said, checking his watch. "I have a meeting to attend, but a car will take you to the hotel. Focus on your competition tomorrow. I'll handle everything else." As Robert left the lounge, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Janet, arrange an emergency board meeting at Skyline headquarters. And make sure Thomas Baldwin is there. It's time he and I had a very direct conversation about how his airline is being run." Outside the airport, news vans were already gathering as the story of what had happened on Flight 372 spread across social media and news outlets. The hashtag Skyline Racism was trending nationwide, with the video of Jasmine's comments being shared millions of times. What had begun as a routine flight was quickly becoming a pivotal moment in the ongoing conversation about racial discrimination in America. And Robert Johnson was about to ensure it became a turning point for corporate accountability as well. Thomas Baldwin, president of Skyline Airlines, paced nervously in his office at the company's San Francisco headquarters. In his 30 years with the airline, he had weathered numerous crises, from financial downturns to safety incidents, but the viral video showing one of his flight attendants discriminating against 3 black teenagers threatened to damage the airline's reputation in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. "How bad is it, Patricia?" he asked his head of public relations, who was monitoring the social media fallout on her tablet. "It's gone national," Patricia replied grimly. "Every major news network has picked it up. The video has over 5 million views already. Hashtag Skyline Racism and hashtag Justice for Triplets are trending. We're getting calls from civil rights organizations, and there's talk of a boycott." Baldwin ran a hand through his thinning silver hair. "Damn it. One employee loses her cool, and suddenly we're being painted as a racist airline. This is a PR nightmare." What Baldwin didn't say, what he would never admit aloud, was that this wasn't an isolated incident. Over the years, dozens of discrimination complaints had been filed against Skyline employees, including several against Jasmine Washington. Baldwin's standard procedure was to handle such complaints quietly, with minimal consequences for the employees involved. In his view, admitting fault only invited lawsuits and bad publicity. "We need to get ahead of this," he told Patricia. "Draft a statement expressing our regret about the alleged incident and promising a thorough investigation. Emphasize our commitment to diversity and inclusion. Make sure to mention our minority hiring initiatives." "Sir," Patricia replied hesitantly, given the video evidence, calling it an alleged incident might come across as dismissive. "The footage is pretty clear." Baldwin waved her concern away. "It's standard legal language. We can't admit fault until we've completed an internal investigation. That's how these things are handled." His intercom buzzed, and his assistant's voice came through. "Mr. Baldwin, HR Director Michaels and Legal Counsel Rodriguez are here for your 2 o'clock. "Send them in," Baldwin directed, straightening his tie. James Michaels and Elena Rodriguez entered the office, both looking grim. They had been reviewing the mounting evidence against Jasmine Washington and assessing the company's potential liability. "It's worse than we initially thought," Rodriguez began without preamble. "Multiple passengers recorded the incident from different angles. There's no ambiguity about what happened. Washington made explicitly racist comments that were captured on video, denied medical assistance to a minor having an asthma attack, and threatened passengers who tried to help. And it turns out this isn't her first offense," Michaels added. "There have been 7 formal complaints of discriminatory behavior filed against her in the past 5 years. All of them were marked as resolved in our system, but there's no record of any disciplinary action." Baldwin shifted uncomfortably. He knew exactly why those complaints had been buried. Washington was the niece of a board member, and Baldwin had personally intervened to protect her position on multiple occasions. "What are our options?" Baldwin asked Rodriguez. "From a legal standpoint, we need to terminate her immediately and issue a clear, unequivocal apology," the attorney advised. "The evidence is overwhelming, and any attempt to defend her actions will only make the company appear complicit." Baldwin frowned. He disliked being cornered. "Let's not be hasty. Washington has been with us for 15 years. Perhaps a suspension and mandatory sensitivity training." He was interrupted by his assistant on the intercom again. "Mr. Baldwin, I apologize for the interruption, but there's an urgent matter. Glowstar Holdings has called an emergency board meeting at 4 p.m. today. Your presence is required." Baldwin's face paled. Glowstar Holdings was Skyline's parent company, and they rarely intervened in day-to-day operations. An emergency board meeting could only mean one thing: the situation was even more serious than he had realized. "Did they say what the meeting is about?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The representative said it concerns today's incident on Flight 372 and, quote, "systemic issues within Skyline's management structure," his assistant replied. After the call ended, Baldwin turned to his team. "Change of plans. We need to prepare for this board meeting. Patricia, draft a more forceful statement condemning Washington's actions and announcing her immediate termination. James, prepare a summary of our diversity initiatives. Elena, I need a legal briefing on our exposure and recommendations for settlements with the affected passengers. What Baldwin didn't know was that Robert Johnson had already been in the building for over an hour, reviewing internal documents and meeting with key staff members. From a secure office on the executive floor, Robert had accessed Skyline's complaint database, discovering dozens of discrimination incidents that had been systematically downplayed or dismissed entirely under Baldwin's leadership. Robert had also met privately with Amelia Foster, the flight attendant who had helped Caleb during his asthma attack. She had provided him with valuable insights into the company culture and confirmed that complaints from minority passengers were routinely treated with less urgency than those from white customers. It was an open secret, Amelia had told him, her voice trembling slightly. Some crew members knew they could get away with certain behaviors because management would always back them up. I've seen it happen repeatedly, but I was afraid to speak up for fear of retaliation. Now, as the hour of the board meeting approached, Robert reviewed his notes one final time. He had built Glowstar Holdings from the ground up, acquiring Skyline Airlines 5 years ago as part of his diversified portfolio. He had intentionally maintained a low profile within the company, allowing Baldwin and his team to operate independently while Robert monitored performance from afar. That hands-off approach ended today. At precisely 4 p.m., Robert entered the boardroom where the Skyline executive team waited nervously. Baldwin stood to greet him, extending his hand. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming. I understand you wanted to discuss the unfortunate incident on today's flight." Robert ignored the outstretched hand. "Mr. Baldwin, I'm not here as a visitor or consultant. I'm here as the CEO of Glowstar Holdings and the owner of this airline. And we have serious matters to discuss regarding how you've been running my company." The color drained from Baldwin's face as the implications of Robert's words sank in. The other executives exchanged alarmed glances as they realized who was standing before them. "But I don't understand," Baldwin stammered. "The CEO of Glowstar is Robert Johnson." "Yes," Robert confirmed, his voice cold. "I am Robert Johnson. And the 3 young men who were discriminated against on your airline today? They're my sons." By evening, the story had exploded across all media platforms. Major news networks interrupted regular programming to cover what was now being called the Skyline incident. Clips from passenger videos played on continuous loops, each showing Jasmine Washington's increasingly hostile behavior toward the triplets. CNN's breaking news banner read, "Discrimination at 30,000 feet, Black teenagers denied medical assistance on Skyline flight." Fox News countered with, "Airline under fire, shocking video shows flight attendants' treatment of honor students." MSNBC's headline struck directly at the corporate angle, "Skyline Airlines faces boycott calls amid viral discrimination video." Social media was ablaze with outrage. The original videos had collectively garnered over 20 million views across platforms. Celebrities and influencers shared the footage with personal statements condemning Skyline. Civil rights organizations issued calls for accountability, and a boycott movement gained momentum with the hashtag #GroundSkyline trending nationwide. In the elegant conference room of San Francisco's Grand Hyatt Hotel, Thomas Baldwin faced a room full of reporters, his usual confidence noticeably absent. The hastily arranged press conference was Skyline's attempt to control the narrative, but Baldwin seemed to be making the situation worse with every word. "Skyline Airlines has a long-standing commitment to diversity and inclusion," he read from prepared remarks, his voice slightly trembling. "The actions of one employee do not reflect our company values. We are conducting a thorough investigation and have placed the flight attendant in question on administrative leave pending." "Administrative leave?" interrupted a reporter from the Washington Post. "The video clearly shows racist behavior and denial of medical assistance to a minor. Why hasn't the employee been terminated?" Baldwin shifted uncomfortably. "As I said, we're conducting a thorough investigation to ensure due process." Another reporter cut in. "Mr. Baldwin, our sources indicate that multiple discrimination complaints have been filed against this same flight attendant over the past 5 years. Can you confirm whether any disciplinary action was ever taken?" I'm not at liberty to discuss personnel matters, Baldwin deflected, tugging at his collar. However, I can assure you that Skyline takes all customer complaints seriously. Then why did it take a viral video for action to be taken? Pressed a CNN correspondent. If previous complaints were taken seriously, wouldn't this flight attendant have been disciplined before this incident occurred? The press conference continued to deteriorate as reporters hammered Baldwin with increasingly pointed questions about Skyline's handling of discrimination complaints, minority hiring practices, and corporate culture. His responses grew more defensive and evasive, further damaging the airline's already tarnished image. Meanwhile, across town at the Four Seasons Hotel, the triplets were preparing for their academic competition the following day. Despite Robert's offer to withdraw them from the event and return home, they had insisted on participating. "We've worked too hard to let this stop us," Isaiah had explained. Besides, that would be letting her win. Robert couldn't have been prouder of their resilience. As they reviewed their study materials, there was a knock at the suite door. Robert opened it to find Dr. Sarah Chen and Amelia Foster waiting outside. "I hope we're not interrupting," Dr. Chen said. "We wanted to check on Caleb and see how all three boys are doing." "That's very kind of you," Robert replied, inviting them in. "The boys would be happy to see you." The triplets greeted their visitors warmly, especially Caleb, who thanked Dr. Chen again for her help during his asthma attack. "I'm just glad I was there," she responded. "And I want you to know I've provided a formal statement to both the airline and the FAA about what I witnessed." Amelia looked nervously at Robert. "Mr. Johnson, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted to let you know that after our meeting this afternoon, I submitted my resignation from Skyline." "Why would you do that?" Elijah asked, concerned. "You were the only one who helped us. The company culture isn't going to change overnight," Amelia explained. "After speaking out about what happened, I'm concerned about retaliation." Robert shook his head. "Ms. Foster, please don't submit your resignation just yet. I think you'll find that changes are coming to Skyline much faster than you might expect. In fact, I may have a proposition for you, but let's discuss that after the boys' competition." Back at Skyline headquarters, the emergency board meeting had reconvened following Baldwin's disastrous press conference. Robert Johnson sat at the head of the table, reviewing documents while the board members and executives waited in tense silence. "Gentlemen, ladies," Robert finally spoke, his voice measured but firm. "What we're dealing with here is not just a PR crisis. It's a fundamental failure of leadership and corporate culture." He placed a thick folder on the table. This contains 63 discrimination complaints filed against Skyline employees over the past 3 years. 24 of those complaints were against Jasmine Washington alone. In every case, the complaints were deemed unsubstantiated or resolved with no disciplinary action taken. Baldwin started to speak, but Robert silenced him with a raised hand. "I've reviewed the internal communications regarding these complaints. In multiple instances, Mr. Baldwin personally intervened to protect Ms. Washington and other employees with similar records." His exact words in one email were, and I quote, "These complaints are typically overblown. Handle it quietly and move on." The board members exchanged alarmed glances. Furthermore, Robert continued, "Skyline's diversity metrics have actually declined under Mr. Baldwin's leadership. The percentage of minority employees in management positions has decreased from 28% to 12% in 5 years. Training budgets for cultural sensitivity and anti-discrimination programs have been cut by 60%. He closed the folder and looked directly at Baldwin. "Mr. Baldwin, your press conference today made it abundantly clear that you still don't understand the severity of this situation. You referred to explicit racism captured on video as alleged. You defended an employee who denied medical assistance to a minor having an asthma attack. And you continue to characterize systemic discrimination within your airline as isolated incidents." Baldwin's face had gone pale. "Mr. Johnson, I assure you." "I'm not interested in your assurances," Robert interrupted. "I'm interested in accountability. Effective immediately, I am exercising my authority as CEO of Glowstar Holdings to remove you from your position as president of Skyline Airlines. Gasps echoed around the table as Baldwin stared in disbelief. You can't do that, he sputtered. The board. The board serves at the pleasure of the majority shareholder, which is Glowstar Holdings, Robert stated firmly. I've already discussed this with key members who agree with my decision. Several board members nodded in confirmation, unwilling to go down with Baldwin's sinking ship. As for Jasmine Washington, Robert continued, she is being terminated for cause, effective immediately. Her actions violated federal aviation regulations, Skyline's own stated policies, and basic human decency. Legal will handle any attempt she makes to contest the termination. Robert stood, buttoning his suit jacket. I'll be personally overseeing Skyline's operations until a suitable replacement can be found. My first priority will be implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, with clear consequences and transparent reporting procedures. My second priority will be a complete overhaul of the corporate culture that allowed this situation to develop in the first place. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each person present. Anyone who isn't on board with these changes should tender their resignation by noon tomorrow. Are there any questions? The room remained silent. Good, Robert concluded. I'll see you all at 9 a.m. for a full strategic review. This meeting is adjourned. As the executives filed out, many already updating their resumes in their minds, Robert remained at the table, reviewing notes for tomorrow's meetings. The situation with Skyline was even worse than he had initially suspected, but he was no stranger to corporate turnarounds. What made this one different, what made it personal, was that it had touched his family directly. His phone buzzed with a text message from Isaiah, just saw the news about Baldwin. Dad, did you buy an entire airline just because of what happened to us today? Robert smiled slightly as he typed his response, no, son. I bought it 5 years ago. Today I just decided to start running it properly. 3 days after the incident, Jasmine Washington arrived at Skyline headquarters, escorted by her attorney, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit. She had been summoned for what she believed would be a meeting with HR to discuss her suspension, a mere formality, in her mind. Her uncle Bernard, a longtime board member, had assured her that Thomas Baldwin would handle the situation as he had previous complaints against her. Remember, say as little as possible, her attorney advised as they were directed to the executive floor. Let me do the talking. Baldwin owes your uncle too many favors to let this affect your career. Jasmine nodded confidently, adjusting her Skyline uniform. Despite the media storm, she remained convinced this was all a misunderstanding that would blow over once the public found something new to be outraged about. When they entered the conference room, however, her confidence faltered. Instead of the HR director and perhaps Baldwin, she found herself facing Robert Johnson, several board members, and a woman she recognized as Vanessa Thompson, the regional director who had removed her from the aircraft. Most surprisingly, Amelia Foster was also present, sitting quietly at the far end of the table. There was no sign of Thomas Baldwin. Ms. Washington, please take a seat, Robert directed, his tone businesslike. I'm Robert Johnson, CEO of Glowstar Holdings and now interim president of Skyline Airlines. Jasmine's attorney stepped forward. My client was told this would be a standard HR review. If this is something more formal, we request time to prepare. This is not a negotiation or a review, Robert interrupted. This is a termination meeting. Ms. Washington's employment with Skyline Airlines has been terminated for cause, effective immediately. Jasmine's face flushed with anger. You can't do that. I have rights. I've been with this company for 15 years. 15 years during which you've accumulated 24 formal complaints of discriminatory behavior, Robert replied, sliding a folder across the table. Including 7 that involved denial of service or assistance to minority passengers. Those complaints were resolved. Jasmine protested. Mr. Baldwin. Mr. Baldwin is no longer with the company, Robert stated flatly. His pattern of dismissing discrimination complaints and fostering a culture of impunity was deemed unacceptable by the board. Jasmine's attorney quickly intervened. "My client categorically denies any discriminatory intent in her actions. The incident on Flight 372 was a misunderstanding exacerbated by disruptive passengers." "Let's review the facts," Robert interrupted, pressing a button that activated a large screen on the wall. "We have video evidence from multiple sources showing Ms. Washington's actions." The screen displayed a compilation of footage from Flight 372, clearly showing Jasmine's differential treatment of passengers, her refusal to assist Caleb during his asthma attack, and her explicitly racist comments. "The videos speak for themselves," Robert continued. "But we also have sworn statements from 12 passengers, including a federal judge and a physician who intervened when your client denied medical assistance to a minor." He clicked to the next slide, showing a timeline of previous complaints against Jasmine. This is not an isolated incident but part of a pattern of behavior that Skyline previously failed to address appropriately. Jasmine's attorney attempted another defense. "These videos lack context. My client was dealing with disruptive passengers who were 3 16-year-old honor students traveling to an academic competition," Robert finished for him. "Students who had valid first-class tickets, who were seated quietly in their assigned seats, and who made repeated polite requests for the same service provided to other passengers." He leaned forward. "One of whom experienced an asthma attack that your client not only ignored but actively prevented others from assisting with." "If I may," Amelia Foster spoke up hesitantly. "I've worked alongside Jasmine for 3 years, and this behavior is consistent with how she's treated minority passengers in the past. Many of us have witnessed it but were afraid to report it because complaints were never taken seriously." Jasmine turned on her former colleague. "You little traitor. Who do you think you are?" "That's enough," Robert said firmly. "Ms. Foster showed tremendous courage both on that flight and in coming forward now. Her actions represent the values Skyline should have been upholding all along." He turned back to Jasmine and her attorney. "Here's what's going to happen. Ms. Washington's employment is terminated, effective immediately. All company benefits and privileges cease today. This decision is final and non-negotiable. We'll sue." Jasmine's attorney declared. "This is wrongful termination. My client has been made a scapegoat for her own documented actions," Robert finished. "Feel free to pursue legal action if you wish. Discovery would be fascinating, given the evidence we've compiled. Not just the videos and witness statements, but also the internal communications showing how previous complaints against Ms. Washington were deliberately buried." He slid another document across the table. "This is your formal termination notice, along with a standard NDA which prevents you from discussing confidential company matters. Should you choose to make public statements about this incident beyond the fact of your termination, Skyline reserves the right to release all evidence and documentation pertaining to your employment history." The attorney quickly reviewed the document, his expression growing concerned. "We'll need time to consider this." "You have 24 hours, Robert replied. "After that, the offer expires, and we proceed accordingly." As Jasmine and her attorney prepared to leave, Robert added one final comment. "Ms. Washington, those disruptive young men you discriminated against. They're my sons. Your actions affected my family personally, but this termination isn't about revenge. It's about accountability for behavior that should never have been tolerated in the first place." The color drained from Jasmine's face as she finally realized the magnitude of her situation. Without another word, she and her attorney left the conference room. After they departed, Robert turned to the remaining executives. "Now, let's discuss the changes Skyline needs to make going forward." He outlined a comprehensive plan for transforming the airline's approach to diversity and inclusion. 1. A zero-tolerance policy for discrimination with clear, consistent consequences. 2. Mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, from executives to frontline staff. 3. A transparent complaint process with independent review of all discrimination allegations. 4. Recruitment initiatives to increase diversity at all levels of the organization. 5. A passenger bill of rights to be prominently displayed on all flights and throughout airports. Ms. Foster, Robert addressed Amelia directly, your actions on Flight 372 exemplified the values we need to cultivate throughout Skyline. I'd like to offer you a new position heading our passenger advocacy program, including development of the anti-discrimination training curriculum. Amelia looked stunned. Mr. Johnson, I appreciate the offer, but I don't have experience in training development or management. You have something more valuable, Robert replied. Integrity and moral courage. The technical skills can be learned. Those character qualities cannot. After the meeting concluded, Robert met privately with Dr. Sarah Chen, who had been asked to join an advisory committee on passenger medical needs and accommodations. Dr. Chen, I can't thank you enough for helping my son during that flight, Robert said sincerely. I was just doing what any decent person would do, she replied. What concerns me is how many similar incidents might be happening that don't get recorded or go viral. That's exactly why I want your perspective on our advisory committee, Robert explained. This isn't just about fixing Skyline. It's about setting a new standard for the entire industry. As evening fell, Robert finally returned to the hotel where his sons were celebrating their second-place finish in the academic decathlon. Despite the trauma of their flight experience, they had performed admirably, missing first place by just 2 points. I'm so proud of you boys, Robert told them, embracing each one. Not just for how you performed in the competition, but for how you handled yourselves during that flight. You showed dignity and restraint in a situation where many adults would have lost their composure. We had a good teacher, Isaiah replied, smiling at his father. So what happens now? Elijah asked. With the airline and everything? Robert considered the question. Now we turn a negative experience into positive change. Not just for Skyline, but hopefully for the industry. Sometimes it takes a spotlight on the worst of human behavior to motivate the best of human potential. Caleb, who had been quieter than usual since the incident, finally spoke up. Do you think it will make a difference? Really? Robert placed his hand on his son's shoulder. It already has. The conversation's happening now, the accountability being demanded, these things matter. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it doesn't happen at all unless someone takes the first step. As they prepared for dinner, Robert's phone buzzed with a news alert. Jasmine Washington had held an impromptu press conference outside Skyline headquarters, tearfully claiming she was being cancelled for a misunderstanding, and that she had always treated all passengers equally. The triplets exchanged glances, but Robert just shook his head. Some people never learn. But that doesn't mean the rest of us should stop trying to teach. ## Part 10, Transformative Conclusion. 3 months after the incident that had captured national attention, the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria in New York City buzzed with activity. The occasion was the annual Excellence in Aviation Gala, where industry leaders gathered to recognize outstanding achievements and innovations. This year, however, the most anticipated announcement wasn't about technological advancements or record profits, but about cultural transformation. Robert Johnson stood at the podium, addressing the gathered executives, industry experts, and media representatives. No longer operating behind the scenes, he had emerged as a powerful advocate for change within the aviation industry. 3 months ago, a disturbing incident on one of our flights forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth, Robert began. Despite our industry's claims of progress in diversity and inclusion, we were failing in fundamental ways to ensure equal treatment for all passengers. The ballroom screens displayed statistics from Skyline's internal audit, a 70% increase in reporting of discrimination incidents since implementing the new transparent system, a 40% increase in minority hiring at management levels, and a 95% passenger satisfaction rating with the new Respect in the Skies initiative. These numbers represent real change, Robert continued. But statistics don't tell the human story. The screens changed to show Isaiah, Elijah, and Caleb Johnson in their academic competition, proudly displaying their second-place trophy. My sons, whose mistreatment catalyzed this transformation, went on to place second in a national academic decathlon. But more importantly, they've launched the Air Justice Initiative, a student-led organization that has already helped over 300 young travelers navigate discrimination complaints and advocate for better policies. Applause filled the room as the triplets, now 17 and dressed in impeccable suits, stood to be recognized. Today, I'm proud to announce that Skyline Airlines is partnering with 12 other major carriers to implement industry-wide standards for anti-discrimination training, transparent complaint procedures, and passenger advocacy. This coalition represents over 70% of domestic air traffic and sends a clear message that discriminatory behavior has no place in American aviation. More applause erupted as representatives from the partner airlines joined Robert on stage, including several CEOs who had initially been reluctant to participate until Skyline's revamped policies began showing positive impacts on both customer satisfaction and employee retention. After the ceremony, the Johnson family gathered in a private room with key figures from the transformation journey. Amelia Foster, now Skyline's Director of Passenger Advocacy and Training, was discussing her new curriculum with Dr. Sarah Chen, who had become a respected advisor on medical accommodations in air travel. The training program is being adopted by 3 international carriers now, Amelia explained excitedly. We're translating it into 12 languages. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. And the medical response protocols you developed have already prevented at least 2 serious incidents. That's lives saved, Amelia. Across the room, Judge William Harrington was engaged in conversation with the triplets about their advocacy work. Your organization is making waves, the judge told them. I've referenced the Air Justice Initiative in 2 recent opinions on transportation discrimination cases. We're just getting started, Isaiah responded confidently. Next month we're launching a scholarship program for minority students interested in aviation careers. And we're developing an app to help travelers document and report incidents in real time, Elijah added, always the tech enthusiast. Caleb, who had emerged from the incident with a new sense of purpose, explained their newest project. We're also creating educational materials for schools about the history of transportation discrimination and how to recognize and respond to bias. Robert watched his sons with immense pride. They had transformed a traumatic experience into a platform for positive change, showing resilience and vision beyond their years. As for Jasmine Washington, her story had taken a different turn. After initially resisting accountability, the overwhelming evidence and public response had forced her to confront her actions. Rather than disappearing from public view, she had eventually issued a genuine apology and enrolled in a restorative justice program. Though she would never work in aviation again, she had begun speaking to employee groups about the consequences of unchecked bias and the importance of self-reflection. Thomas Baldwin, the former Skyline president, had not fared as well. His attempts to deflect responsibility had backfired when internal communications revealed his systematic suppression of discrimination complaints. He was now facing a congressional inquiry into his management practices, with several former executives cooperating with investigators. The evening concluded with a dinner where Robert found himself seated next to the CEO of a competing airline who had initially been skeptical of the Respect in the Skies initiative. I have to admit, Johnson, the CEO confessed, I thought this was just a PR move at first. But the metrics don't lie. Your customer loyalty numbers are through the roof, employee retention is up, and those diversity hiring statistics are impressive. It turns out, Robert replied, that doing the right thing is also good business. When passengers feel respected and employees feel valued, regardless of their background, everyone benefits, including shareholders. Later that night, back in their hotel suite, Robert sat with his sons reflecting on the journey of the past 3 months. When Mom was diagnosed, Robert said quietly, referencing his late wife Angela, she made me promise to raise you boys to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. I think she'd be incredibly proud of who you've become. The triplets nodded, emotion visible on their faces. Their mother's memory remained a powerful force in their lives. Dad, Caleb asked, do you think things will really change in the long run? Or will people just move on to the next viral story and forget about this? Robert considered the question carefully. Real change is never quick or easy. There will always be resistance, backlash, and attempts to return to the status quo. But what happened to you has already improved conditions for thousands of travelers. The policies we've implemented will protect countless more. And the awareness you've raised through your advocacy work can't be undone. He looked at each of his sons in turn. The most important change is the one that happens within individuals, the moment someone recognizes their own bias or finds the courage to speak up against discrimination. Those moments are happening every day because of what you started. Isaiah raised his glass of sparkling cider. To Mom, who taught us to stand tall. To Dad, Elijah added, who showed us how to use our voices. And to everyone, Caleb concluded, who chooses dignity over discrimination, every single day. As they toasted their remarkable journey from victims of bias to catalysts for change, Robert knew that their story was far from over. The road ahead would have challenges, but the foundations they had built, in policy, in practice, and in public consciousness, would continue to transform the landscape of American aviation and, perhaps, American society itself. Sometimes, he reflected, the most powerful changes begin with the most painful moments. What matters is not the injustice that occurs, but the justice that follows. And in that regard, their family's legacy was just beginning to unfold. #lessons from this story. This story reminds us that discrimination often thrives in environments where accountability is lacking. When institutions prioritize protecting employees over addressing legitimate complaints, they enable harmful behavior to continue. True change requires courage at every level, from individuals like Amelia who risk their positions to do what's right, to leaders like Robert who use their power to create systemic reform. The triplets demonstrate that responding to discrimination with dignity doesn't mean accepting it. By documenting their experience and pursuing justice through proper channels, they transformed their personal trauma into positive change for countless others. Their advocacy shows how individual incidents can catalyze broader movements for equality. Perhaps most importantly, this story highlights that addressing discrimination isn't just about punishing offenders, it's about creating new systems that prevent bias from taking root in the first place. Through education, transparent policies, and consistent accountability, organizations can build cultures where respect becomes the standard rather than the exception. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination on your next flight? Would you speak up like Amelia and Dr. Chen, or remain silent? The choices we make in these moments define not just who we are, but the kind of society we create together. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more powerful stories of justice and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and comment below with your own experiences standing up against racism. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in public and intervened? What happened? Your stories might inspire others to find their courage when it matters most. Thank you for watching. Together, we can create a world where everyone travels, and lives, with dignity and respect.